What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to learn how you can bring 3D and animate it into your iOS project. Before we jump into things, make sure you hit that like button down below and let's get started. So we're going to be working with a design tool called Spline today. And Spline allows you to basically create beautiful 3D, edit it, animate it, and most importantly, bring it on into your iOS project. So the best way to describe Spline, in my opinion, is it's a design tool specifically focusing on 3D. So in a world moving towards spatial computing, the Vision Pro, and just really beautiful 3D design expectations that lots of projects and apps have set for folks, it's a must in terms of your workflow and working with 3D without really having to go into the nitty-gritty of how you would create these things. Spline's got you covered. So we're going to get started by navigating to spline.design, linked down below, and we're going to scroll all the way down and we're going to find the download option for the Spline tool. Now Spline has a web-based tool as well, but we're going to be working with the desktop tool that we'll get started with, and we're going to bring in a design to our SwiftUI project that we'll also create. So once you've got the tool downloaded, go ahead and open it on up, and once you open up the tool, you'll be prompted to sign in, and once you sign in, you'll get to a screen that kind of looks like this. So let's do a quick little overview of the tool and where things are. So this screen here, you'll see your files at the top. When you're freshly here, you won't have anything here, but I've got some files that I've worked with before that show up here. Below it, you'll have tutorials and a few other things, but let's actually focus on this panel on the left-hand side over here. And inside here, you'll see a couple things. The ones that I would like to call out are first and foremost the library. The library gives you an array of scenes and various objects, cartoons, sketches, paths that Spline provides for you out of the box. You can take these, adjust them, tweak them, design them to really fit your needs. And what's great about this is the fact that you don't need to start from scratch. You have a place to start from. The next option that I want to talk to is tutorials. So in terms of any design tool, there is a bit of a ramp up that you need in terms of how things work. You can think of this similar to like a Figma or a Sketch in terms of how you create particles and how do you create blurs and different animations. And what's nice is there is a host of tutorials here to get you ramped up and working with the tool without feeling super overwhelmed and on your own. And last but certainly not least, the option that I want to call out on the left over here is community. Now, community is kind of what it sounds like. You can find things that community members, other people that use Spline, have created and shared here. You can actually select things and remix them and really collaborate with other 3D designers and folks in the world that use Spline. And what's really cool about this is you can get a lot of inspiration from other folks' work and really make it your own and work with it, and then of course contribute back to the community as well. All right, so that all being said, let's jump back to kind of our home view here, and we're going to jump into one of these designs that we're going to be working with today, specifically the house here. So once you jump into a design, or a scene rather, you're going to be greeted with this view. So on the left-hand side, you have basically all your objects here, inclusive of, any cylinders or cubes or things that you see in the scene here. We also have a camera in here that we're going to be using later on to do some animation. In the middle here, you see your actual scene itself. So we can actually click and drag, but I'm going to hold Option, and you can see that we can actually rotate this 3D, and we can see it from different perspectives, the bottom, the top. We can also pinch to zoom in and out in terms of using a multi-touch trackpad if you have that available. You can see the numbers adjusting as well on the right. We're actually changing the size and field of view, as well as here we've got orientation, the actual orbit that we're changing. So this is your scene in the middle. This is where you can also select things that you want to edit that we'll do momentarily. Now on the right hand side, we've got this panel with a bunch of attributes. So if I come on the left over here and I select one of these things, one of these objects, you'll see that the selection or attributes on the right changes based on what I've got selected. And you can make tweaks for it there, and we're going to be doing that in a moment as well. At the top, we've got this bar with some options for sizing, export. We also have this play button here that we're going to be working with later on to see an animation in action. So that's a quick overview of the kind of space we're going to be working with. So before we actually bring this into our iOS app, we need an iOS app. So let's open up Xcode here, and we're going to create a SwiftUI project and bring in Spline and see how to get this up and running. So create a new project here. I'm going to call this Cool 3D. Make sure you've got SwiftUI selected for your interface and Swift, of course, as the language. Create your project and save it wherever you'd like. I'll toss it onto my desktop here. And the first thing you'll want to do once Xcode loads up here is bring in the Spline package and load up your preview. So let's give our preview a quick seconds to load here. Sometimes it's a little faster, sometimes it's a tad bit slower. So just bear with Xcode. And while it's doing that, I'll also bump up the font size so we can all see everything nice and big. So while it's actually loading that preview, let's bring in the Spline package. So we're going to do that by going up here to the top left to File, and we're going to go to Add Package Dependencies. And once we are here, you're going to want to paste in the repo URL. This is similar to any repo, but I've brought it in before. So here we have Spline iOS. I'll link the repo in the description down below. Sometimes Xcode acts up and you'll see that it's not able to resolve it. If it's not able to do that, the best way to go about fixing this is by just trying 1 or 2 times. This is a known Apple bug, so if you hit it, just try one or two times and it'll bring it on in. And cool, good deal. It looks like our preview is also loaded while we were doing that. So we should be able to build now. So up here, you can select the simulator of your choice, but we are going to be working with this preview on the right, and everything should be building. So what do we want to do? The first thing we're going to do up here is we're going to import Spline runtime, and inside of our actual body here, we are going to make some adjustments to what this is going to look like. So we're going to have a VStack. Up here, we're going to want our 3D to show up, which we're going to bring in shortly. And below that, maybe I want a little bit of space. So maybe I'll have another VStack with a spacing of perhaps 12. Let's get rid of this autocomplete content here. And inside of this, maybe we'll have a button that says something like get started. And maybe we'll also have a text label that's welcome. Perhaps we're building something like a onboarding screen. So on the right here, we should see that. Let's see if we have it looks like we have an issue here. We're missing a parenthesis. So make sure you do add that so you don't make a mistake. And we should see our button and label over here. And let's bring in that 3D content. So let's come back to Spline, and before we make any edits here, let's hit this export button at the top, and you'll see this window pop up. And there's a lot of options in here to share this as a URL, work with it in web, but what we care about is Apple platforms. So you can actually generate a full-blown iOS project with this, but since we're iOS developers, we're just gonna export the actual 3D here. Now there's 2 ways you can actually export something. One, you can bring it in via a cloud URL, which is this URL, and we'll just copy this code here. Or you can download the scene and bring it in as a local asset. Now, what's really cool about the cloud option is the fact that as you make edits here in Spline, you can just hit update and you'll see them in your project in real time, which is really nice when you want to iterate quickly and just, get your updates in quick as you build and develop. And when you want to bring this into your project locally as a file, you can just download it, bring it on in, and that way your users don't have to deal with not having an internet connection and other edge cases like that. All right, so we've got our 3D export code copied. So we're going to come down here and just paste what we copied. And we'll see some stuff in here that we're going to adjust. So first and foremost, let's get rid of these imports since we already have them at the top. I am going to call this a header. And let's take a look at what the code in here is actually giving us. So it looks like it's giving us 2 URLs. We have this one here and this one that's commented out. The first one up here is for the cloud export, if you will. So you're basically pulling the 3D from the cloud. And this would be if it was a local asset, which we'll do momentarily. And then finally down here, you're actually creating the Spline scene from the URL. So we've created this header. We don't see it here because we're not using the header yet. So let's actually bring this header into our code right where we mentioned the 3D. So we'll bring in this header, and I am going to set a height on this frame to something like 500, and let's see what that looks like. All right, so it looks like our 3D actually just popped in. It was rather quick. Let me actually also get rid of this ignores all for the edges here, and let me actually cut this, and we'll bring this up, and we are going to stick it onto the VStack here. Now, I think it'd be kind of nice if we push the content up so it's not kind of sitting in the center vertically. So let's add a spacer over here. And if we take a look at our device, everything is pushed up, so looking pretty good. Now, right now it kind of just looks like a 2D image. So where's the 3D aspect of this? Well, if you actually click and hold Option and you drag, you'll see once more, we actually did bring in the entire 3D. And what's really cool about this is the fact that it's already interactive out of the box. Now I'm holding Option to drag, so i.e. on a device you would have 2 fingers to interact and pan and orbit and whatnot with this. In this case we're only orbiting, but you can actually adjust this in the export settings as well. So now that we've got this here, a couple of things that we first want to talk about. One, the size and the field of view. So back in the tool, what we are going to do is essentially come back to our primary kind of editor UI here, close out that export window. And on the left-hand side, we want to scroll all the way up and select this camera. Now, this scene particularly has a camera already, but if you wanted to add a camera, you can hit this plus button in this top bar and scroll all the way down, and you'll find an option for a camera in there. And while we're here, you'll notice there's actually tons of other things you can add as well in terms of adding to your scene. So once we've got this camera selected here, on the right-hand side, you'll see there are options for fields of view, which is this FOV option here, and we can actually increase this. So if I add a 1, you'll see that it'll adjust. So there's a couple of things we want to do. We want to jump and snap this to the camera that we're currently using, and that'll show our camera adjustment. So you'll see that kind of popped and zoomed out. The other thing I'll call your attention to in terms of sizing is this drop down up here for sizing. You can also use this to make adjustments. And last but not least, in terms of sizing, you can also use this option up here, and you can actually use it to change the background kind of frame, if you will. So we're gonna actually bring this on in just a smidge. And all right, we are looking good. Let's hit export, and let's hit this update button here to get this to kind of save to our cloud URL, if you will. And let's come back over to our Xcode window. And our Xcode window will hit Command Option P, and this will update our preview here, our canvas. And you'll see it's zoomed out now. We can still interact with this. It's still looking pretty good. Now let's make a few edits and also add an animation. So the animation we're going to do second, but first let's make an edit. So what I'll do is I'll pinch to zoom into our house a little bit here, and what we're going to learn to edit is the color of this door. Of course, it's a simple edit. You can do tons of crazy things in here and really make it your own, but let's keep things simple today. On the left-hand side, let me just zoom in here. We are going to find the house, which is this group, and open it on up. Once we open the house, what we want to focus on specifically is the door. So the reason I like to work on those objects in the left pane versus selecting in here is because I feel it's a little easier to really select the thing you want to work with rather than accidentally clicking something else. Now what I want to do is change the color. So on the right hand side, we're going to actually select this option here, which will open up a pane, and we're going to change this color of the material. We'll get this open. We'll actually close this little secondary window out, and we'll scroll down, and we're going to get this color selection option. And let's actually change this here. Maybe we'll make the door, maybe we want it to be a bright red color like that. So we'll do that. We'll click out of it. Don't forget to hit export. We're going to hit update. All right, let this guy update here. And let's come back to our Xcode window. And we'll want to hit Command P to refresh this. And we'll see that not only is it zoomed in again, but we're now also using that red door. So, okay, looking pretty good. We've got 3D in here. We can pan around and orbit. I should say orbit specifically. And we've got a red door. It's looking pretty good. Let's add an animation before we take a look at bringing this final scene in as a local asset. So to animate, of course, let's go back to Spline. And what we want to select is the camera all the way up here. Let me just focus over here so we can all see it. So the camera in the left-hand tray. And we're going to start from this state. And the way that animations work and the way we're going to do it today is we're going to create a transition, and we're going to transition between a base state and a final resting state. So once you've got the camera selected, at the top right here, we're going to hit this plus to bring in these two kind of states. We have base, and then we also have this like final, if you will. And as we select one of these, we can adjust what we want it to look like. So we're going to go from the base state to this state. And specifically, we just want to zoom out where this ends up. So we're going to kind of zoom in, zoom out, and it's going to loop. So to zoom out, we can either adjust these options, the numbers here on the right pane manually, or what I'll do is I will pinch to zoom this out, and I'll try to make it not too ridiculous. So we're going to basically start from this base state and end up here. We can also adjust the rotation, but for now, let's just do the zoom to keep it simple. If you did want to adjust the rotation, once again, the orbit, I should say, you can use the numbers here, or you can hold Option and kind of drag to rotate here. So I can actually do that. So we'll go from this to this. Now to do that, let me zoom in here once more. We're going to add a event. Specifically, we want to transition. So inside here, you'll see there are a whole host of options that we can indeed pick from. You can actually make it, really your own in terms of what you want it to look like and stand out for your work. But what we care about is a transition. We'll select it and open up this panel, and we'll want a couple things. The first thing we'll want to do is we want to say that this goes from our base state to our state. It takes maybe 4 seconds, and we do want this to loop. So let's come down here and we will say that this is infinite. And then finally, we want this to ping pong, i.e. once this animation kind of zooms out, we want it to ping pong or reverse and zoom back in. So once we've made those edits, let's actually hit this play button here, and you'll see this kind of rotates and zooms out. It's a little bit slow, but I think the little subtlety of it being slow is kind of nice. And then it ping pongs back in. All right, so let's bring this into our project. We're going to hit export once more. We'll hit update. And while we're actually here, like I mentioned earlier, you can adjust some of these settings in this option here. If you hit this segment, you'll see there's options here in terms of how many fingers you would need to pan and orbit and things of that nature. So quick little call out for that. But now that we've exported back inside Xcode, let's actually refresh our preview, and we should see that animation looping beautifully just like that. So that's basically a quick overview of bringing 3D into your project and animating it as well. The last thing I do want to touch on is here we are using the cloud URL to essentially bring this in, and that's how we were able to iterate quickly. But let's say we want to bring in the file itself. There are trade-offs in terms of file size, but we're going to bring this in. We're going to learn how to do that. So we're going to comment out this URL, and I'm going to uncomment this URL. And what's nice is the Spline already gives a lot of this code for you, so it significantly, makes your life easy. Looks like our preview crashed here because we don't have this file in our project yet, so this is expected, bear in mind. So now what we want to do is export that scene from Spline, and it's called scene. And it'll be Spline Swift in terms of the file extension, so .spline Swift, and we want to bring this in. So let's jump back to Spline. We're going to hit export, and right below this code snippet, you'll see this option here to export for local. So we'll hit this, and it's going to ask us what we want to call this. So I am actually just going to adjust this name here to be scene. So let's call this scene.spline Swift. We will save it to our desktop like so. And once we hit save, it should export it there. And if I just quickly move to my desktop, we should see the file at the top right here. And let's bring this into Xcode. So we'll go back to Xcode. We're going to right click on our project folder here, and we'll hit add. And once we hit that, we'll open up this Finder window, and we want to navigate to that file. We'll hit next, and it should have brought it in. Let's make sure we got it. All right, we got it. Beautiful. Let's jump back here and refresh our preview. And boom, we once again have our animating 3D in our project. So now we're bringing it in as a local file. I do want to once again call out that there is a trade-off to bringing in files locally. So if I select this file and hit Command I to open up the options for it, you will see that there is a reasonable amount of size to this, right? If we have maybe one or two of these, it's not crazy, but if you add a bunch of these, bear in mind, there is a trade-off, just like anything else, in terms of bringing in 3D as local files. Last but certainly not least, I do want to call out the minimum requirements in terms of using Spline 3D in your project. Because Spline uses some of the latest and greatest technology, there is a bit of a high minimum requirement in terms of the supported iOS, macOS version. As you can see here, I will link to this in the description down below as well. And finally, before we wrap up, I do want to give a special shout out to the fact that Spline offers a way to mirror your Spline designs for visionOS. Specifically with Spline Mirror, you can actually start working with 3D and bring it on into your brand new visionOS experiences, really play with the 3D in a spatial computing environment and see what it's all about instead of only working on your computer. A lot of these 3D creations really come to life when you're able to see them in a 3D environment. So Spline Mirror really excels at letting you do that while you also work and iterate on your designs, right? Like you might think it looks great when it's on your computer, but when you use it in your visionOS app, you might get some more ideas of maybe making things larger, maybe adjusting the way the colors look, etc., etc. So that is all I've got for you guys today. This is once again Spline's design tool, also called Spline. Check the description for all the links to all the reference material. Thanks so much for watching. Hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't done so already. I will catch you guys in the next one.